The last 3 years were the hottest on record, new data has shown. Bad news for polar bears and for the planet as a whole, where extreme weather events caused death and destruction in 2017. It was the warmest year recorded without the influence of a temperature-boosting El Niño phenomenon. The USA had its most expensive year ever in terms of weather and climate disasters, and the head of the World Meteorological Organization says other countries saw their development slowed or reversed by tropical cyclones, floods and drought. Last year, China ramped up its war on pollution. Also a major problem in India. But the joy of the 2015 Paris Climate Pact now seems like a distant memory. Not least since President Trump, who doubts climate change is caused by man-made emissions, is withdrawing the US from the deal.
The storm pummeled Western Europe with hurricane-like force. Here, the wind rips a roof off of a building in the Netherlands and peels off the side of a house. Severe weather alerts were issued in the Netherlands as gale force winds reached 140 kilometers an hour. People were urged to stay home for their own safety. Those who did venture outdoors were struggling to keep their feet on the ground. But it didn't deter this daredevil, who saw the high winds as an opportunity to go for the ultimate kite surfing experience. The storm is causing travel chaos. Hundreds of flights were grounded, and in Germany, all long-distance rail services were suspended.
There is a danger that trees will fall onto the overhead wires, and there's a danger that trees will block routes. We know from past experience with extreme weather conditions that it's better to keep the trains inside stations where we can better take care of passengers than in between stations.
Power outages hit tens of thousands of people in Germany, Belgium and the Netherlands, and roads were blocked by fallen trees and debris. High wind and heavy snow also hit parts of the UK. Scotland is dealing with power outages and dangerously icy roads. But the storm isn't losing strength. It's moving across the continent with Eastern Europe in its sights. Catherine Stansel, Al Jazeera.
The death toll from Storm Frederic in northern Europe has risen to 11. The deadly storm ripped through Germany and the Netherlands on Thursday, January 18th, with winds of up to 90 miles per hour. According to the authorities, the deaths were caused by falling trees, debris and traffic accidents. The storm caused havoc, uprooting trees, tearing down structures and bringing transportation to a halt. Hundreds of thousands of homes were also left without power. The countries now face a huge clean-up effort, particularly Germany. Insurers estimate the storm damage across the country will cost around €500 million. Work went on throughout the night on Thursday to clear roads and railway lines, and Germany's national rail operator says more than 200 sections of railway are damaged. This is the second major storm Europe has felt the wrath of this month. Storm Eleanor killed at least 3 people in early January. For United News International, I'm Rachel Latham. Experts say a remote island volcano in Papua New Guinea could erupt soon. Cadova Island on the north coast of Papua New Guinea hosts a 365-metre tall volcano, and it was thought to be dormant until recently. Cadova residents and residents of islands surrounding Cadova started to be evacuated in early January, and as of Thursday, January 18th, thousands of people have been moved. The military evacuated people by boat, nearby flights were cancelled, and ships are being warned to stay clear. Seismic activity recently increased beneath the volcano, and it is emitting smoke and ash. A Red Cross spokesperson said on Thursday he doesn't know if everyone has been evacuated yet. According to volcanologists, there are no confirmed reports of a previous large-scale eruption on Cadova. Papua New Guinea, however, sits on the Ring of Fire and has frequent earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. For United News International, I'm Rachel Latham.
The Trump administration reportedly wants to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem faster than anticipated. Senior officials told the New York Times the move could happen as soon as 2019, despite the administration originally planning not to rush the transition. The outlet also says the State Department decided to use an existing building for the embassy instead of constructing a new one. President Donald Trump announced in December he decided to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move the U.S. Embassy there. That decision was met with near worldwide condemnation, including from many Americans.
Now the very latest on the flu epidemic. Emergency rooms across the country are at capacity, schools are closing, and at least 20 children have died. And the deadly flu season could be getting worse. RT's Trinity Chavez has the story.
Flu season is in full swing, and it's straining health systems all throughout the country. Already, this is the worst flu season in over a decade. The health community bracing for how it's going to deal with this increasingly deadly epidemic. Hospitals overwhelmed and waiting rooms overflowing with patients to the point where they have been setting up tents outside to deal with the surge in patients.
We have seen a rise in the number of patients that are seeking, services for symptoms of having the flu.
Schools have closed in San Antonio, Cleveland, and Oklahoma. One Texas school district had over 300 students and staff out sick this week, forced to cancel school as well. Alabama declaring a public health emergency, and in California, at least 42 people under the age of 65 have died from flu-related symptoms. And the flu continues to claim lives across the country. A 40-year-old mother and marathon runner from California, and a 21-year-old fitness fanatic from Pittsburgh. But the flu is especially deadly among children. At least 20 kids have died this season, and just this week the deadly virus claimed the lives of 2 third graders.
Influenza killed 650,000 people every year around the world.
And the death toll continues to soar, especially in European countries. In Scotland, another 21 have died, and 8 in Northern Ireland. And in England, almost 3 times as many people are dying of flu this winter compared to just last year. According to health officials in England, at least 120 people have died of flu-related symptoms since October. Many UK pharmacies are now facing new fears of a shortage of the flu vaccination.
Until very recently, people have been able to get the flu jab, but I think in the last couple of weeks places have started running out, and so we've noticed a surge in demand for that reason.
Yet current vaccinations have little effect on this year's strain.
It really is a scientific challenge of getting a vaccine that would induce a response against the part of influenza that doesn't change from year to year. Influenza is a relatively unique virus because it tends to mutate a lot.
We can never predict what dominating strain of virus will be the main cause of illness in coming influenza season, but we may try to guess based on data from the previous season, and also looking into how viruses are evolving.
And the World Health Organization urges the importance of readiness in the case of an influenza pandemic.
We are monitoring globally all the events. We are monitoring viruses. We are preparing composition of vaccines. We are working with manufacturers to be ready to produce vaccine, to develop and to produce vaccines once it will be needed.
Now, although experts say that finding a vaccine for the flu is not an easy task, with 3 months left of the current flu season, experts still say to get the flu shot because some protection is better than no protection. Reporting in New York, Trinity Chavez, RT.
Heavy winds, snow, lower temperatures. Lebanon is being hit by a storm, making the lives of the nearly 1 million Syrian refugees even more miserable. They face many challenges during the winter months, among them the lack of proper shelter. They live in tents that are made from plastic sheeting, which does little to protect from the cold and the rain.
We couldn't sleep all night. The tent was flooded. We stayed up and moved all our belongings outside. The conditions of our tents are bad.
It's the Shebli family's 7th winter in displacement since fleeing the conflict in neighboring Syria. In winter, the refugees require more help. They need fuel for heating, thermal blankets, and warm clothes.
We are dead. We are living in misery. We have nothing but pain, sickness, and suffering. We are deprived of everything.
Families like the Abdul Hamads can't survive without assistance. Ahmad, the father, is half blind. The youngest child, Sabrine, is mentally challenged. The eldest has heart disease, and their mother suffers from asthma and eczema.
I need medicine and I need help. We all cannot work. We don't have wood and fuel to keep warm. We're living only by God's mercy. I may be kicked out of this tent soon because I didn't pay the rent for a long time.
The United Nations does provide some assistance, but a shortfall in funding means not everyone is reached. The United Nations doesn't just help the more than 5 million Syrian refugees in neighboring countries. It says 13 million people need help in Syria. 6 million of them are internally displaced. And the displacement continues. In recent weeks, more than 200,000 people were forced to leave their homes. The war is not over. It may be a while before these refugees can go home. The Lebanese government doesn't want them to stay. That is why it has prevented the United Nations from building permanent camps. It also doesn't allow any concrete construction. But this may not be their last harsh winter in exile. Zana Khuder, Al Jazeera, Bekaa Valley, Lebanon.
These Rohingya men, women and children are just some of the new arrivals. They fled Myanmar into Bangladesh in recent days and are now being provided shelter in a refugee camp close to the border. Taharir Begum says she paid a boatman around $70 to ferry her family across the river into Bangladesh. But she and her 3 sons then got separated from her husband's 16-year-old daughter and the boy's grandmother. She doesn't know where they are.
The Myanmar soldiers were demanding girls. They said, "Give us girls and save yourselves." They have been giving the Rohingya cards that say we are from Bangladesh.
The Myanmar government considers the Rohingya illegal immigrants, and they've suffered decades of persecution. The latest crackdown began after a Rohingya rebel group attacked police posts, killing a number of security forces in August last year. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingya fled the violence. The UN has accused Myanmar of ethnic cleansing. It's estimated that the army killed at least 6,700 Rohingya in the first few weeks of the crackdown.
We don't want to go back. My brother-in-law and my nephew were slaughtered. As my children are still so young, they are safer, but the adults are killed.
Carrying what few belongings they have, Tahira and her sons are taken to collect their shelter kits. The distribution centre is a 20-minute walk through the camp where more than 650,000 Rohingya refugees live now. The families are handed bags containing basic household goods and healthcare items. Now, although the number of Rohingya crossing from Myanmar into Bangladesh in recent weeks has dropped considerably, according to the International Organization for Migration, around 2,400 people crossed in December alone. Now, the plan put forward by the Myanmar and the Bangladesh governments to start repatriating Rohingya that wants to go back to Myanmar is due to start in a couple of days. But it's new arrivals like these that highlight just how vulnerable and afraid the Rohingya in Myanmar remain. The UN and international aid organisations say it's too early for refugees to return when their security cannot be guaranteed.
IOM is not involved in repatriation. These talks are happening bilaterally between the two governments. But as you can see today, we are still having people arriving on a regular basis in desperate need of humanitarian support.
Tahira and her boys are taken to the place where aid workers are building their shelter. This tiny bamboo and tarpaulin hut will be home for the foreseeable future. I hope my husband, daughter and grandmother can find us here, she says. Charles Stratford, Al Jazeera, Balukhali refugee camp, Bangladesh.
This mountain of trash is not simply a garbage dump. It's now home to a growing number of displaced Yemenis in the Houthi-controlled city of Hodeidah. Despite health risks, it provides a place to sleep, food, and even a source of income for 11-year-old Ayub, its newest resident.
We came here to eat and drink from the garbage. I collect bread and plastic, and I go back to sell it for money to buy food.
The nearly 3-year war in Yemen has led to a diphtheria outbreak that's spreading quickly, a cholera outbreak that's killed more than 2,000 people, and the deaths of thousands more from the violence, disease, and malnutrition.
The Saudi-led coalition has been an utter disaster for the civilians of Yemen. Add on top of that the blockade, which, while temporarily eased, is still quite severe. So it's urgent, really, to address the world's largest humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and the only way to do that is to squeeze the Saudis.
And it's that international squeeze that's led the Saudi-led coalition to ease the blockade that was imposed on ports and airports in November. Now UN aid agencies are calling for the port of Hodeidah to remain open after Friday, the date set by the coalition to allow the continued delivery of life-saving goods and fuel.
There's no future in the country. Better do this than beg. We gather plastic bottles and bread and make do with what we can get.
The UN says 4 mobile cranes arrived in Hodeidah, and for now the port is open. But the fate of millions of Yemenis facing famine rests with the coalition. Brandice Alexander, Al Jazeera.
Start this hour in Afghanistan, where a major hotel in the capital Kabul has come under attack by a group of 4 armed men. Police say that they have killed 2 of the perpetrators, but that the 2 others remain at large. There are also reports of several fatalities. But so far, there's no official number of casualties. With more details, is local journalist in Afghanistan, Bilal Sawari.
According to several sources within the Afghan Special Forces, the first and second floor has been cleared. Some rooms on the 3rd floor are either burned down, and some of them have caught fire. And there's definitely a gun battle on the 4th floor, according to multiple sources within the crisis response unit team. One fighter told me that he saw 2 people who were carried away from the 3rd floor. He couldn't really tell me whether they were injured or they were killed. This is still an ongoing situation, but we still don't know who is really inside the hotel, how many casualties and fatalities we're talking about. And this is also a hotel that got attacked in 2011. And we only heard in the last 48 hours or so from the U.S. Embassy in Kabul putting a security alert saying a number of hotels and government buildings and other locations were at risk of an attack. Obviously, this sort of an attack shows the constant security and intelligence failure, but it also shows how the Afghan government and its international allies are finding themselves fight another fight on a very difficult front line, which is the cities. It's still a very confusing situation. Some people were able to get out of the hotel. They managed to get out, and they have told local TV stations about casualties and fatalities. So we'll have to wait and hear more from the authorities there.
Somalian U.S. commandos conducted an overnight raid of an al-Shabaab camp, killing at least 4 militants and rescuing children who had been forcibly recruited by the extremist group. A Somali intelligence official told the Associated Press on January 19th that special forces raided the camp, rescuing dozens of children who had been kidnapped and were being indoctrinated by al-Shabaab. The operation came after Human Rights Watch accused al-Shabaab of forcing communities in remote areas to hand over children as young as 8 to be trained as fighters. Also on Thursday, U.S. Africa Command said that it conducted an airstrike in Somalia that killed 4 other al-Shabaab militants. The U.S. stepped up its involvement in Somalia last March after President Trump approved expanded military efforts against al-Shabaab. For United News International in Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin May. India successfully test-fired a long-range nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile, which it lauded as a major boost to its military capability. Indian authorities said that the launch sent an Agni 5 flying from an island off the country's east coast on January 18th. The missile, which can carry a nuclear warhead, reportedly flew roughly 3,000 miles in 19 minutes. India's defense ministry called the test a major boost to the country's defense capabilities. The Agni 5 is believed to be India's most advanced ICBM and puts it in a small group of countries who are known to have ICBMs. According to CNBC, the Agni 5 has been successfully tested 5 times over the past 6 years, with the most recent test prior to Thursday's launch coming in December 2016. For United News International in Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
Turkish artillery along the border, shelling the Afrin region in northern Syria, held by the YPG.
This operation against terrorism will be carried out. Any step to prevent us from our final aim to stop or to weaken it will never stop us. There is no return from this.
This is not what the United States wanted. Instead, the State Department had called on Turkey to fight Daesh.
We would call on, certainly on the Turks, to not take any actions of that sort. We want everyone there to keep their eye. I'll go back to something I said when we were talking about Iraq and the referendum, to keep their eye on the ball. And the focus needs to be on ISIS.
Turkey deployed the tanks to the border region in advance of a planned incursion into Afrin, an enclave held by YPG terror group, which is backed and armed by the US as part of its fight against Daesh. Turkey's decision to mobilize its military has also gotten the attention of the Syrian regime. It has warned it will destroy any Turkish warplanes that fly into its airspace.
We just want to know that the Syrian air defense systems have recovered full force and they are ready to destroy any Turkish aviation targets in the airspace of the Syrian Arab Republic.
In the meantime, Turkish officials have held several meetings with the Russians, allies of the Syrian regime. They've asked for Moscow to open its airspace and allow Turkey's warplanes to fly over Afrin. The Turkish foreign minister says Russians shouldn't oppose the Afrin operation and instead help Ankara coordinate the military advance. Nafisa Latic, TRT World.
The situation around Syria was one of the issues the Russian foreign minister addressed during a media conference after a United Nations Security Council meeting in New York. There for us was Kelly Maupin.
During the press conference, we heard a lot from the Russian foreign minister. He made wide-ranging comments about different parts of the world. Now, I had the opportunity to ask the foreign minister a question. I asked him about the fact that right now, the USA says that its forces in Syria, which are there without the permission of the Syrian government, it says that they're only there to ensure the defeat of the ISIS terrorists. But at this point, now they're saying that to withdraw them would strengthen the Syrian government, the internationally recognized legitimate government of Syria. So I asked Sergei Lavrov about this kind of mixed message coming from U.S. leaders and what it's like, and he gave me this response.
The lack of a fundamental commitment to our agreements is typical of current U.S. diplomacy, including the reasons why the Americans stay in Syria. Rex Tillerson repeatedly stated that their only goal in Syria was the defeat of ISIL. Now they've got far more ambitious plans.
Another topic that came up during the press conference was the JCPOA. It was pointed out that the situation and the negotiations with North Korea could be affected if the USA is to withdraw from the Iran deal. Now, Lavrov was directly asked about the fact that Trump and others have questioned and talked about pulling the USA out of the Iran deal. This is what he had to say about the JCPOA.
The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was centered on Iran stopping its military nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of anti-Iran sanctions. A similar deal is now being tabled for North Korea. But if the Iran deal is seen to mean nothing, how can we expect the DPRK to approve a similar deal that could be retracted any moment?
It seemed one of the overall themes of Lavrov's remarks was Russia's efforts to stabilize the world and reduce the level of terrorism and instability around the world in different regions. He voiced some criticism of U.S. leaders and some frustrations, but overall, the theme was an effort to kind of get along with countries around the world and create stability in parts of the world that have been unstable and plagued by terrorism, violence, and extremism.
About a week after deploying B-2 stealth bombers to Guam, the U.S. Air Force announced that it has sent 6 of its powerful B-52 strategic bombers to the island territory. The B-52 Stratofortress bombers, along with about 300 airmen, arrived in Guam on January 16th. Those bombers are in addition to the 3 B-2 Spirits that deployed to the territory earlier this month. The aircraft will support U.S. Pacific Command's Continuous Bomber Presence mission, replacing 6 B-1B Lancers, which are scheduled to return stateside at the end of this month. That means that for a few days, all 3 types of bombers will be flying together out of Guam. Just the second time that has ever happened. The robust bomber presence is intended to reassure allies in the region and show strength against potential adversaries, including China and North Korea. For United News International in Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
From bases in Britain, NATO has been conducting wargaming exercises over the North Sea, using B-52 bombers capable of carrying nuclear weapons. The exercises come as Russia has been conducting its own nuclear bomber exercises along the coasts of Norway and Britain, prompting both NATO members to scramble their fighter planes.
You can see the boom behind me. Right now it's tucked up against the aircraft, and what'll happen during the refueling is it'll drop down and extend toward the receiver as the receiver is coming up behind the KC-135 for fuel.
Once it's been refueled in flight, the B-52's range goes way beyond Europe and onto the Middle East and across Asia. In fact, it can reach anywhere in the world, and NATO's fighter jets can also be refueled to extend their range.
And that's really shown as an overarching posture of deterrence within not only this region but around the world. It's really reassuring our allies against any potential adversary out there that's out there in today's world.
During the exercises, a British Typhoon fighter jet was also refueled. Last week, an unknown number of British Typhoons were scrambled to intercept 2 Russian nuclear-capable Blackjack bombers that came as close as 80 kilometers to the British coast.
Staying with the policy briefing, the Defense Ministry vowed to improve the military's capability to protect the nation. Also on the agenda, thorough discussions with Washington for a swift wartime operational control transfer. Woo Jung-hee has the details.
In 2018, South Korea will continue to keep a firm military readiness against threats from North Korea. It'll further strengthen its alliance with the United States while working to upgrade its own independent defense capabilities. Laying out goals for the new year on Friday, South Korea's defense ministry announced it'll increase its annual budget for 2018 by over 14% to roughly $517 million. That's mainly to speed up the establishment of the country's 3-pillar defense system that consists of the kill chain system, the Korea Air Missile Defense, and the Korea Massive Punishment and Retaliation systems. They can detect movements of weapons and troops all over North Korea, including its missiles, target the regime's military headquarters, and protect key facilities in the south. The South Korea military will also continue to gear up for the transfer of wartime operational control back as soon as possible from Washington to Seoul. The allies will work together on forming a new combined forces command and measures to jointly defend South Korea after the OPCON transfer. As for Pyongyang this year, defense officials expect it'll continue its nuclear and missile programs to deter what the regime sees as threats from the U.S. The U.S. and South Korea, in their own deterrence move, plan to deploy U.S. strategic assets on a regular basis to the Korean peninsula. Seoul also hopes to restore or expand military interaction with 3 other powers in the region: China, Japan, and Russia. More cooperation is also sought with Australia and India, as well as Southeast Asia. But above all else, for the time being, the priority for the Defense Ministry is the peaceful and safe hosting of Pyeongchang Winter Olympics next month. To prevent any type of terror incidents during the Games, the South Korea military will be checking security at Pyeongchang and upping its terror alert level. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
The American Defense Secretary James Mattis has warned that North Korea is a threat to global stability with its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Setting out his country's defense strategy on Friday, Mattis said rogue regimes like North Korea and Iran persist in taking outlaw actions that threaten regional and even global stability. He added that by oppressing their own people and shredding their dignity and human rights, they push their warped views outward. Mattis also said that competition between the main global powers, including China and Russia, is now the main focus of U.S. national security.
You got it.
With just a few lessons, Lily is carving the slopes on her snowboard.
The most challenging part of snowboarding was stopping. Yeah.
That's like the most important part.
I know.
For this 10-year-old, the excitement of hitting the snow for the first time is a much-needed distraction, as she's trained by Paralympian Keith Gable at the Hartford Ski Spectacular in Colorado.
My favorite part about snowboarding is getting to share my passion with people like this young lady right here.
Lily was born with a severe joint disorder and voluntarily had her legs amputated. Earlier this year, Lily suffered another loss. Her family's home burned down in the California wildfires. All that was left was rubble. The most important thing she needs, her prosthetic legs and wheelchair, were destroyed.
It was hard for the first day that I knew everything in my house was gone, but I'm glad I'm here.
There you go. Twist your shoulders.
Getting to snowboard is certainly a highlight for the tween, and even as she learns, she teaches.
Her story is so powerful. It's so empowering. Lily has inspired me in so many ways, and I do feel like I can relate to her a little bit.
And it won't be long before she's catching some major air. Way to go, Lily.